And Tuesday, a Hamas spokesperson says that dozens of hostages would be returned only if all parties remain committed to the ceasefire deal. This comes after President Donald Trump threatened that, quote, all hell will break out if the group does not release the remaining Israeli hostages by this weekend. Hamas says Israel is not allowing a surge of tents and shelters into Gaza and blames Israel for a delay in the release of prisoners. Israel says Hamas was not abiding by the deal by releasing female IDF soldiers before female civilians. So far during the ceasefire, 21 hostages have been freed and 730 Palestinian prisoners have been released in exchange. Joining us now is Rachel Goldberg Polin and John Polin, parents of Hersh Goldberg Polin, who was murdered in August while held in Hamas's tunnels alongside 5 other civilians. Thank you both so much for being here, and my deepest condolences. I want to talk about what we saw on Saturday.
Yeah.
We watched those 3 hostages released, or Levy, Eli Sharabi, and Ohad Ben Ami. They were at a fraction of their body weight. Rachel, I saw an interview that you did on Israeli TV saying no one should be surprised at the conditions of these men. Why did you say that?
Well, we had our son released dead to us at the very end of August. His body and 5 other beautiful young people's bodies were discovered in an airless, lightless tunnel under Rafah in Gaza, and they were all skeletal. Hersh was 6 feet tall. He weighed 115 pounds when we buried him on September 1st. Eden Yerushalmi, who was a young woman who he was with, was 5'5", and she was 78 pounds. All of them were skeletal. The only difference was that they didn't walk out, so people didn't see the footage or still pictures of them. And so now, as you know, as a journalist, picture's worth 1,000 words. And thankfully, these 3 men were able to walk out on Saturday, barely, because they were so emaciated. But the powers that be knew for at least 160 days prior, and we now know even before then, because the former defense minister said, we knew then and we know now that they were being tortured, that they were being starved, and intelligence sources have known this for over a year.
Or was one of the hostages released, and he was in the bomb shelter with Hersh that day and on that pickup truck with him. What was it like for you to see him come home?
Yes, so Hersh was taken with 3 others. It was Hersh, Or Levy, Elia Cohen, and Alon Ohel. And so we are thrilled that one of them has finally come back home alive. And we are praying and working and advocating for Elia and Alon to soon follow. It was really sweet of Or. He had been subjected to torture and starvation for nearly 500 days. Yet the day he was released, his family called us to say that Or, one of his first questions was, how is Hersh? Or was disconnected from the outside world. He was taken with Hersh, and he had seen Hersh at some point during the captivity, but that was over 400 days ago. And Or has assumed all along that Hersh had been released alive. And so he was surprised to find out that Hersh had been returned to us after 330 days in captivity, dead. But again, it just is lighting the fire under all of us, including Or, who basically from his hospital bed is so energized to do what he can to help all of the others, including those other 2 boys who were taken with him.
And Or returned home to find out that his wife had been murdered that day. He had not seen his 1-year-old son. Now he's 3 years old. Hamas is saying that the hostage release is canceled indefinitely, and in response, President said Monday that all hell's going to break out if these hostages, if all of them aren't released by noon on Saturday, and he's doubling down today. You guys made an Instagram video this weekend, a plea basically saying all the hostages need to be released this week and end the war. Do you think Hamas is taking Trump's threats seriously?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. First of all, it's a fact that after over 450 days of things being stuck and hostages just languishing there, President Trump and his envoy, Mr. Witkoff, have been successful in getting things to move. They've opened up the cork and gotten things to move. At this point, it's all still so precarious. And what we're saying and what all of the recently released hostages are saying is they're suffering there so much. And by the way, the people of Gaza have benefited from the ceasefire so far. Aid has been getting in. Food has been getting in. Living quarters have made it in. All of the citizens of this region benefit from this deal continuing. It is our sincere hope that President Trump is able to continue to work his deal-making power and keep things on track so that we continue to see more and more releases faster and relief for the people of Gaza as well.
Yeah, I was getting messages early this morning on social media with people just asking why the hostage release needs to be so spaced out and not just done in a shorter amount of time. But now we're hearing Trump talk about this post-war Gaza plan, removing Palestinians from the Strip. Do those kinds of comments, Rachel, concern you about the safety of the remaining hostages when he makes comments like that?
I really don't know how to read the pulse of what people who are holding other people are thinking. It's a complex game to try to play, getting in someone else's head. I think that, again, what President Trump is very well known for is shaking things up, for making people look at things a different way, forget about taking things out of the box or looking at things out of the box. He just doesn't even need a box. And I do think that in this region, we have been stuck in the same paradigms over and over again for so many years of violence, revenge, rinse, repeat, violence, revenge, rinse, repeat. And now we're trying to think, what can make this a different paradigm? And it's unknown what will be in the future, but we have to figure out how to live here together, or we are all going to die here together.
Is that why you've been appealing directly to President Trump and maybe not necessarily Prime Minister Netanyahu?
We were appealing to President Trump first because he is the one who got this going. Remember, this was stuck for 400 days. Before 3 weeks ago, when the young women started to come out, we had over 400 days of complete and utter torture and agony as people just suffering from being in an excruciating place that was completely tangled. He untangled that knot and got things moving. So I was appealing to him as someone who also has spent his entire career making deals. And this is a deal that needed someone who that was all that they did, is know how to make a deal. And also, we're Americans, and we felt very much that the American administration, both the Biden administration and now the Trump administration, has been very open and welcoming to our thoughts. And so we were appealing to them.
And not just our thoughts, but we continue to advocate for every single hostage of every nationality, all 76 who remain. But there are, I remind your viewers, 6 American citizens still being held. So this is not just about deal making and diplomacy. It's about Americans caring about and doing what they have to do to help their fellow Americans.
Given what we saw last Saturday, we're 4 days from hopefully seeing at least some hostages again. Are you worried about the condition of the hostages, that they could be worse than what we saw this past weekend?
We're terribly worried. We're terribly concerned. It seems that the hostages are being released in order of their condition. And this last release, we saw these 3 men who were unrecognizable to their closest families. I mean, Eli Sharabi was truly unrecognizable. And also remember, Eli Sharabi on that stage that they're all sort of paraded across before they go into the Red Cross vans to be returned. He was told by his captors that he was going back so that he could reunite with his wife and his 2 daughters. He has 2 teenage daughters. Unfortunately, when he got to Israel, he found out that his wife and those 2 teenage daughters were murdered on October 7th, over 490 days before he had been released. I mean, there is complete and utter agony and misery wrapped up in this entire situation, and it must come to an end. And the only way for that to happen is for this to continue, this ceasefire to continue, this hostage release to continue.
John and Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate your insight and you still speaking out about this issue.
Thanks for the
Thank you
opportunity.
for having us, and let's hope for more good news.